Okay, the Riley branch of my ancestors' immigration to Canada from Ireland was triggered by robbery and an attempted murder. Pause for effect. The 19th century in the British Isles was a time of strife. The Protestant Reformation had caused a great deal of dissension throughout Ireland. The religious conflict in the 1800s between the Protestants and the Catholics was why many families emigrated to North America and Australia. Overpopulation also meant too many mouths to feed and too many bodies to clad. With an abundance of cheap labor, wages became lower and lower until many people could barely survive. In 1850, disaster struck again with the potato famine, when thousands died of starvation. My Protestant Riley ancestors lived in the primarily Catholic county of Leitrim, where they rented land and farmed. The Catholic majority were doing everything possible to drive the Protestants out of the area. The Riley children were not even allowed to go to school. The final blow to the Riley family was when some outlaws ambushed Arthur Riley, my great-great-grandfather, while he was on his way to the landlord to pay for his rent. They stole his rent money and they left him for dead. Arthur and his wife Anne had 7 children: Archibald, Archie, Francis, Fanny, Alex, Jane, Elizabeth, George, and Arthur. One of the 4 sons, Archie, he's the bearded guy, had a true Irish temper and vowed he was going to go and get even with those tyrants who had robbed and crippled his father. Fearing that Archie would also be beaten or killed, his mother Anne persuaded him and his sister Frances to emigrate to Canada. Archie had earlier married Mary McClellan, whose older brother had moved to Canada and settled near Cookstown around 1837. So Archie and Fanny set off, and they arrived in Cookstown in 1873. That same year, their father Arthur had died. Archie contracted out around Cookstown and eventually brought his wife Marie over to Canada. They had 5 girls. Marie died before 1891. Sometime later, Archie married Rachel McClellan and the family moved into the Halliburton area. In October of 1874 in Cookstown, Fanny met and married Tom Baker, another Irishman from Leitrim County, Ireland. They settled in Cookstown and raised a family of 5 children. Alex and Jane were the next to arrive in 1878. In 1881, Alex married Margaret Ann Ford in Cookstown. They raised a family of 12. The first 4 children were born in Ontario, and then they moved to Saskatchewan around 1890. Also in 1881, Jane married Enos Fildy, a widower with 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls. I'm going to circle back to these 2 girls in a moment. Enos and Jane had 8 children of their own. 1 child died as a baby, and they farmed in Tecumseh Township. The remainder of the Riley family, Arthur, Elizabeth, George, and their mother Anne, emigrated in 1883 and settled in Cookstown. Arthur married Mary Jane Findlay. She's one of those 2 girls I mentioned earlier. They had 7 children. Elizabeth never married and lived in the Cookstown area as near as I can tell. George is my great-grandfather. He's the guy with the mustache. He first married Matilda White. They had 2 children, but they both died at childbirth. Matilda died in 1896. George's second marriage was to Sarah Elizabeth Fildy, the second of those 2 girls I married earlier. So here we have 2 brothers, Arthur and George Riley, married to 2 sisters, Mary Jane and Sarah Elizabeth Fildy, with a sister, Jane Riley, as a mother-in-law, and the girl's husband's sister as the girl's stepmother. I'm going to pause so you can wrap that around your head. Okay. George and Sarah Elizabeth first rented a farm in Innisfil Township and later in West Gwillimbury. They had a family of 7 children: Annie, Mitchell, my grandfather, Alec, May, Sarah, Clarence, and Josephine. In 1919, George and Sarah Elizabeth bought the northwest corner farm on Lot 14, Concession 11 from Mrs. Nishaw. Annie married Fred Brown and moved to the family farm in West Gwillimbury. They had 6 children. May married Percy Filby and moved to Toronto, and their daughter Dorothy is credited as our family historian. Sarah married Albert Wood and moved to the northeast corner of Lot 14, Concession 11, and they had 2 sons, Don and Laurie. Josephine married Edney Howard, and they moved to Minton, Saskatchewan. Sadly, she died in 1952 when a tractor overturned on her. They did not have any children. Clarence worked with his father and later with his brother Alec on the farm, and he never married. I don't know if you can see this, but anyway. After their father, George, bought the farm on Lot 14, Concession 11, Alec and Mitchell rented Nishaw's farm on Lot 20, Concession 11. It was at this farm, while operating a machine, that Mitchell had his left hand cut off in the cutting box. He wore a hook the remainder of his life. It never stopped anything from doing anything. After the accident, Alex contracted out in the community, and Mitchell returned to help his father on the farm. In 1926, Alec returned to the farm on Lot 14 when his father, George, became ill. George passed away in 1939. In 1952, Alec bought the northeast corner of Lot 14, Concession 11 from Thomas Thorpe. He severed off 6 acres with the house and sold it to his sister, Sarah. Soon after, Alec bought the southeast part of Lot 14, Concession 11 for a pasture farm. It was about 60 acres. And Alec never married.
Excuse me, Brian. Can you show with the mouse there where these lots are?
Yes.
You can use the mouse on the laptop there. If you just touch the...
I got a pointer trying.
Oh,
Perfect.
Just push the real button.
Okay, Lot Colson's Hill, Lot 14. All of it plays out here. Lot 20 is over by the railway tracks. That's where he lost his hand. And we'll come to it later, but Lot 9 and 10 is where Mitchell bought a farm and my dad bought a farm. And a pasture farm is these 2 here, lots 12, 9, and 10. Come back to it.
What acreage are those, roughly?
Each concession is about a half, so 100 acres, 100 acres. So 200 is one, as I understand it. Okay, in 1926, my grandfather married, in 1926, Mitchell, my grandfather, married the girl from the farm across the road. Her name was Fern Brecken. Together, they rented nearby land and farmed. In 1930, they bought the 100-acre farm on the north half of Lot 5 in Concession 9. That's now down in here. So, that's basically the farm that my grandfather bought. That's basically 1968.
Is that Middleton Road?
That's 5 Side Road
If that-
Fifth side
and
road.
5th Side Road and 10th line.
I guess Middleton's the 10th side of it.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And that's what it looks like today. So as you can see, it hasn't changed a whole lot. Very similar. They had a son, Gordon, my father, and a daughter, Irene. Basically, that's 1940 versus 2002. In 1943, Mitchell bought the 100 acres on the south half of lots 9 and 10 on concession 12 as a pasture farm. That's shortly. Okay. Now, this pasture farm, I fondly remember a twice a year 7-kilometer cattle drive between the home farm and the pasture farm. And often one or two of these damn calves would decide to strike off, and us young kid runners would have to chase them back. The old cows always knew the way. Back then, every car we met knew enough to just stop and patiently wait until the cars walked around them. Imagine doing that today. The solid line is pre-1968, and the dashed line is post-1968, because in 1968, Mitchell and Fern sold the farm and they retired to Bradford.
How long would that take you?
Depending on how many cows ran away.
On average?
It was generally an all-day affair. Start at 10 and be done by 3. But, you know, if all went well, it was basically an hour and a half, 2.
How many cattle were you talking about?
50, generally 50. Like I said, the old cows, they knew the way. You get an old girl there going, she drove the rest of them. It was the young ones who had problems with it. As always, right? Okay. Irene married Robert Button and established a successful fencing business that continues today. They had 2 sons, Ken and Ted.
Yeah, I've done business with them.
Sorry?
Buttons. I know them well, I've done business with them.
Yep.
They used to have a dog kennel.
Mm,
Lots of fencing needed for
Yep.
a dog kennel.
Oh, okay. Okay, in 1950, Gordon bought the 140-acre farm on the north half of Lot 6 and Concession 9 from Henry Arnold. Essentially, that is the farm across from his dad, across the road from his dad. In 1954, he married the new Pinkerton school teacher, Sarah Early, from Sandhill, Ontario. They had 3 sons, Doug, Walter, and me. Perhaps many of you are familiar with that site, but basically that was the house that we stayed in. That's pictures circa 1968. That's what it looks like today. The barn is still there, but the rest of the outbuildings and house have been changed.
So is that on the 10th line? Or where is that?
That is halfway on 5-side road between the 9th and the 10th line.
Oh, okay, it's on this side road, okay.
400 is that way. That's the 10th line dead end.
Okay.
Is that the barn that on the east side had a cow on it for a huge drawing of a painting of a cow?
Not that I recall.
No?
It might have been when
Did that
Tracy's
used
owned
to
it.
be owned by Chris Rucky, that farm, one time? Like, not that house, on the other side?
I don't know. No, I think it was Tracy's bought it after Dad sold it.
I see.
Okay. In 1968, the farm on Lot 14, Concession 11, was purchased from the Riley estate, and major improvements to land, barns, and houses were made. Basically, this is what we moved into in 1968. 1974, that's what it looked like with the addition to the house. An aerial shot, that's circa 1980. And in 2000, Mom was really passionate about the roses. The farm continued operations into the late 70s, and when lots were severed off and 2 homes built in the early 80s. Gordon retired from real estate in the late 1990s, and with his wife Sarah, often spent their winters in Florida. They sold the farm on Lot 14, Concession 11, and built a new home and workshop on the pasture farm in 2000. After Sarah's passing, that home was sold. Irene's 2 sons had built homes earlier on the pasture farm, Lot 9 and 10, Concession 12, and they reside there still today. My brother Doug moved to Cornwall. He is still working part-time in the milling machine support industry. He has 2 sons. One is a plumber, and the other manages a pool business and is a singer-songwriter. My brother Wally passed away in 2012. He has a son and a daughter. His son is a Crown attorney, and the daughter is in the financial trade. Both of them have 2 children each. I enjoyed a 40-year career with de Havilland Aircraft in tech support avionics. I retired in 2018. Cynthia and I have 2 sons. One is in the auto parts trade, and the other is in the Canadian military based out of Leitrim in Ottawa. And we have 1 grandson. As to the original farm on Lot 14, Concession 11, that George Riley emigrated to from Ireland and to eventually own, his descendants, Laurie and Marie Wood, still live on the northeast side, and Cynthia and I still live on the southeast side. The original homestead structure still exists under multiple additions but can still be recognized. So you can see the house to the left that's still the same. And lastly, a good majority of my great-great-grandparents, Arthur and Ann Riley's descendants, are buried in Cookstown or Colson's Hill cemeteries. The spelling of the name was changed by my grandfather from R-E-I-L-L-Y to R-I-L-E-Y simply because there were 2 Mitchells and 2 Annies living in and doing business in the Cookstown area. Thank you for listening.